All right. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, David Paulides. It's about time, right? I know what you're thinking. Here we go. Yes. He holds 2 degrees from the University of San Francisco. Professional background that includes 20 years in law enforcement and a senior executive positions in the technology sector. David has retired twice, by the way, and is now the director, of course, of Can-Am Missing Project. He's the author and researcher behind the entire Missing 411 book series, 411, and has been on countless radio and television shows. He is the executive producer for Missing 411, the movie. And tonight we're going to discuss his life, career, and 4 cases, maybe 5, maybe 6, maybe 7 cases that he's investigated and written about that may involve possibly the paranormal, maybe the supernatural, or something else altogether. And I would like to welcome for the first time to Fade to Black, David Paulides. David, welcome, my friend. How are you?
Hey, Jimmy. Pleasure to be with you finally.
Yeah, I know, right? I know we keep talking about this, but it seriously, it is it's something that we've been looking forward to for a long time. We just haven't been able to get it lined up. But tonight's the night, and then we're going to do back-to-back shows actually, and we're going to have you back for the premiere of your next documentary. So you know what? Too much of a good thing, right?
Hey, we'll try it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Now, this is how we're going to see. I'm already nervous, David, but let's do this first. You get the first-time guest disclaimer. Now, next time you're on the show, you're not going to get it, but you're going to get it tonight, which is this. It's just you and I sitting on my couch having a conversation as friends, and where that conversation starts, it starts. Where it ends, it ends, but we're going to end as friends. There you go. All right. You ready?
I guess so.
Yeah, see, that's good. Now, see, I got you off guard. Okay, now your work has been out there for quite a while now, and you have earned the reputation that you've got. That is awesome. And so, without spending a whole lot of time, discussing that, I do want to push it back a little bit, though, into your years in law enforcement, where you know how an investigation should be handled, how it should be done. And when you're out there today looking at these different cases, you can smell when something isn't quite right. And shouldn't other law enforcement agencies, know who you are and maybe deal with you a little bit different? When it's not right.
Yeah, and I guess I've been pretty good at sniffing around and delineating what's fact, what's fiction, what's interesting, what's not, and what looks suspicious and what doesn't. But I think it's the perspective. I worked for a big police department, 1,400 officers, city of San Jose.
Right.
And I spent a total of 20 years being a cop, doing a lot of different things. I worked in the decoy part of the police department for a while, where you dress up like an old man and you get rolled by the hoodlums downtown. And I bought drugs as a narcotics officer for a while, and I worked intelligence, and I worked task forces too. And one of the things that I got to respect, because I worked with so many different people and jurisdictions over time, is that perspective that different people have. And when I'm accumulating cases from all over the world, but kind of keep it in perspective of just North America for a second, a lot of these places that have a missing person have very limited resources. And 95% of all the people that search for missing people are volunteers like you and me. And they go out and they get their certifications on their own. They pay up for their own certifications. They do it on their own time. They take vacation time to do it. And when they're searching, they're not compensated. They're taking time off from work and their family to go out and be a good citizen.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know this.
Right.
And when they go out there and they're thinking one thing: this person's lost. They need our help now. They'll just break their back, spend 16 hours a day searching. And when they find that person, case closed. We found them. Thank God. Let's leave them alone. Maybe because they only had their underwear on, or maybe because had some injuries to them that just didn't make any sense. They didn't care. They did their job. They found the person. They're not investigators. They're not police officers. They're not deputy sheriffs. Thank God somebody was looking and they found the people. Now, from that perspective, I don't have anything I can say negative about the search and rescue people. They're phenomenal. But once the body or the citizen gets turned over to either their relatives or the police, there's very little to zero follow-up that goes on. Now, in the instance where a body is found, yes, they take that body, and sometimes there's an autopsy. Now, in certain states like California, if it's an unattended death, there's for sure going to be an autopsy. But in a lot of these rural areas, I mean, sometimes in the old days, the dentist did the autopsy.
Right.
So, I mean, there wasn't a good accountability of what happened. But sometimes they wrote down a lot of things that were suspicious. A lot of times in these cases, it appears as though the person fell from height, but there was no height to fall from, or it doesn't make any sense. Other times, they're found without clothes, and the report says, oh, they must have been hypothermic and they stripped their clothes. But the clothes were found in very close proximity to where they disappeared, and there was no time for hypothermia to set in. So the logic behind some of these reports doesn't make sense.
And if I'm understanding you correctly, and it makes a lot of sense, by the way, if I'm understanding you correctly, once search and rescue finds the body, locates the body, and that for them, everything technically may be over in that nobody's going out a couple of miles away and looking for evidence or poking around or looking for, that there is no CSI, right? Crime scene investigation of the forensics of the area or anything like that to look for something else. Pretty much it's case closed at that point. Am I understanding you?
About 95% of the time, I'd say that's true. I'll just talk off the cuff for a second. There was a case 15 years ago out of Oregon, and this older dad, 65 years old, was hunting with his sons, and it started snowing real hard. They agreed to meet back at the car. The dad didn't make it back. Massive search, 10-day search. They didn't find anything. Fast forward 10 months. That next summer, a physician is 10 miles into the wilderness with his family looking for a place to camp, and he sees a rifle leaning against a tree. He sees some clothing laying there, and he sees some glasses. And he says, hey, something's not right.
Right.
So they come out, they notify the sheriff. The sheriff goes back in, they run the serial number on the gun, and it's this old guy's gun, and all of his clothes, and nothing's making sense. And his glasses are there, and he can't see without his glasses. Well, it turns out I was able to contact this retired deputy sheriff, a great guy. And I said, hey, what happened with this? And he goes, my God, Dave. He says, I was a deputy sheriff for 32 years, and you're asking me about the one case in my career that didn't make any sense. And he says, myself and another deputy were sent in by the sheriff to look for evidence of where this man was and what happened to him. And he said all of the clothes he was wearing was right there. His glasses were right there. His rifle was right there. And we searched out for a radius of 1.5 miles. We didn't find any bones. We never found him. We never found anything that made any sense about all this. And he said the worst thing about it was that the family couldn't get a death certificate because they couldn't prove the guy was dead, even though everyone knew. But he said, what happened to this man? He said, it'll haunt me for the rest of my life.
Did they ever find the body?
No, never found it.
The thought of, and this is when you go through, okay, I mean it like this. You and I can talk about this and people can listen to it, but when you read case after case, these aren't isolated incidents. How many cases have you investigated in the last 15 years, 20 years?
So I've written about maybe 1,200.
1,200. This isn't some isolated incident that may or may not make the news, right? You start to see a pattern here, and when you read this case after case in this book, where I'm finding myself going, wait a minute, I didn't hear about this. this wasn't in the news. This isn't, but it's a repetitive thing over and over again. Ultimately, what do you think that we're looking at here? Is it a case of law enforcement not having the resources to do investigations to resolve these? Or is there something more crazy? I mean, what do you think ultimately is happening?
So when I first started to do this, Jimmy, I read a couple hundred reports in the first couple months. And after that, I started to think, hey, I remember this happening in a couple other cases. And I went back and I started to make these piles in the basement of my house. And I had maybe 12 of these piles. And each one of the piles represented something unusual that happened in that search. And in all of the cases, the number one most unusual thing, I call it a profile point,
right,
was that bloodhounds or canines would be brought to the scene and they couldn't pick up a scent of the victim. Sometimes the dog would walk in a circle and sit down at the handler's feet as though it didn't want to go down the trail, or it couldn't pick up a scent. The handler couldn't tell. Other times they'd walk down the trail a bit and then turn around and come back. Professional trackers that were brought to the scene couldn't find tracks that left the area where the victim was last seen.
Right.
Other times, the victim's clothes or shoes were found in close proximity to where they disappeared, which doesn't make any sense. Another biggie is that at the time the person disappears, or at about the time the search and rescue starts, there's a weather event. That weather event could be rain, blizzard, snow, dust storm.
Clouds. I saw that over and over again.
Anything that could inhibit air support,
right,
inhibit the search effort, etc. And I started to make these stacks. Well, one of the subsets of these stacks was granite and boulders. And I didn't think much about it at the beginning, but after a couple years, I had this, oh, wow. And when I was on the police department and we were looking for, say, a serial bank robber or rapist, we would have a map of the city and we'd start to put pins in the map where the person committed their crime. And we knew that the first crime the person commits is usually the closest to their home, and they'll start moving outward from there. And we'd start to track, and we would use a profiler to tell us where the person would go next. And I thought, well, maybe I ought to start putting pins in a U.S. map. And that was, oh my God, after 4 or 5 years, it starts to really lay itself out. And there are 59 geographical clusters of missing people in North America that fit the profile points we established after looking at thousands of cases. And the number one location in the United States, well, in the world at this point, for missing people fitting our profile points is Yosemite National Park, which also just happens to be the number one place in the world for boulders and granites.
And one of the biggest tourist destinations in the United States.
And what people would think right away is, oh, these people must be disappearing from the backcountry when they're on these long backpacking excursions. Incorrect. Several of the disappearances have happened right in Yosemite Valley.
There is something else here that I found interesting. Somebody just tweeted as I'm thinking this, well, don't walk alone. Lesson is don't walk alone in the woods. Case after case here, you just brought up the point with the father and sons. Case after case here, it's a group of people. I mean, they are not doing this stuff alone. And they still wind up missing sometimes feet from, whether it's a weather disturbance or something else, from their family or friends. And they weren't alone, were they?
Well, I call it the point of separation, meaning a group is walking down a trail. And let's say somebody in that group gets ahead of the group and goes around a turn, and they're momentarily out of sight. Or somebody steps behind another person behind a bush. That point of separation, something happens. It never happens in plain view. It always happens when there's this separation for some reason or another. There's been maybe a handful of cases I've written about in 8 books where multiple people have disappeared simultaneously, but it is really, really unusual.
If there's one thing that you could take off the list, and I'm going to suggest something, and you tell me if I'm correct, if you would do the same thing. But if we were going to take one thing off the list, would it be serial killing? A serial killer? Is that one thing we just take off the list?
Well, in fact, we'll get to that right now. So part of the vetting process that we use to ensure that these cases don't have a rational aspect to them is a criminal element. Is there a possibility that a crime occurred and that's why the person disappeared? If that's part of the equation, we don't put it in our stack. Another one is if the person has known mental illness, is suicidal, we won't look at it. If there's something rational to explain what happened, no, we won't get into it. If there's predation by an animal, any evidence of that, we won't take it. And all of these things are listed in the search and rescue report, and these are also things that are vetted out by them at the beginning because that gives them an angle at how they're going to conduct their search.
Why is it that, and we're going to head to a break, and when we come back, I'm going to let everybody know, we're going to start off with one of the Now, you know what, David? I thought that I knew everything or close to it. But this Mount Rainier case that we're going to talk about after the break, that's a mind bender on every level, by the way. That thing has got some issues with it from top to bottom, all the way to today. We're going to do that when we come back. But before we get there, the other aspect to this where we are talking about an elimination of the criminal element, why is it that your critics out there, and I know you know this question is coming, why your critics out there will say, you know what, I've looked at the material. There's a reasonable, rational explanation to all of it. There's nothing crazy going on here, nothing to see, move along. How do you respond to that?
That's really easy. When I do a presentation at a big conference, I ask people in the audience right near the beginning, how many here are parents? Everyone raises their hand, and I said, okay, if we put your child down on a trail in the middle of nowhere and you walk away, what's your child going to do? And half the people say, maybe walk around 3 or 4 or 5 minutes and then lay down and take a nap. Other people say, they're going to run down the trail downhill and just, get tired in 20 minutes and lay down and take a nap. And I put up a graph that shows the number of kids that I've written about, 2 years old, that have been found 9 miles and 2 mountain ranges away where there are no roads. How does that 2-year-old do that in 9 hours? Or another 2-year-old that's found 3,500 feet higher than where they disappeared, up a mountain. But these aren't just 1 or 2 cases. I have a whole table of these on pages. And so if you're rational and if you're logical, you're going to say, that's impossible. But it's reality. And the people that are my naysayers, I can guarantee they've never read the books. And if they have read the books, then they have an agenda that we just don't understand. Because if you're a parent, you'll look at this and go, my kid couldn't even come close to doing that.
Is that, do you, that's a great point. Do you actually, no, I'm sure you have. I want to know how many times, do you actually look at somebody and go, okay, stop. Have you read my books? Right? Do you look for that response out of somebody? Because I think that's a great question to ask somebody.
There's, honestly, when I go to the conferences, it just seems like everybody knows the material really, really well. I don't get hardly anybody when I'm face-to-face with them that challenges me. Because, if you know your material well, Jimmy, you could take anybody apart very easily. It's going to be very hard for somebody to come back at me at this point and say, oh, this all makes sense. Because I made a presentation in front of the largest search and rescue organization in the world. It's called NASAR. And I laid all of this out. 1.5-hour presentation. And at the very end, everyone's clapping. 2 guys in the back of the room, giant guys, stand up. And they go, Mr. Politis, we're Alaska State Troopers. And we are in charge of all the search and rescue in the state of Alaska. And we've come to probably 10 of these conferences. and you're the first person that's ever stood up here and said something that nobody here wants to talk about. We all know that we're normally searching in a 2-mile radius for a small child. But you just presented to us how many times we've got to start thinking outside the box, that these kids are somehow getting outside of that zone and not by their own force. And you're just saying something that we all need to hear, and thank you for saying it. So,
do you think you're affecting change?
Awareness for sure. Change, I don't know. There's groups that are so slow to change, law enforcement, search and rescue. There's a lot of things that are written about me out there that are 1,000% not true. Like they said, oh, Politis thinks it's this, or Politis thinks it's that. And that immediately turns off that part of the world. They say, oh, he's already come to conclusions that it's aliens or something.
Right.
I've never said anything like that. I've never even come to close to a hypothesis or naming suspects in any of my books. I relate just facts.
I remember this is quite a while ago, but I remember hearing somebody say your name had come up, and somebody said, he thinks it's Bigfoot. And I kind of stepped back and went, well, I think he's done Bigfoot investigations, but I don't think David has ever come to a conclusion. How many times have I asked you that? Right?
Quite a few, yeah.
Yeah. And, that you were the Bigfoot guy, that you've been blaming the 411 books are about Bigfoot, and that it couldn't be further from the truth.
And again, Jimmy, you can't control what other people say, but I mean, there's a couple of times on Facebook somebody will say something totally irrational, and the thousands of people that have read my books that are on my Facebook page just annihilate the person with facts, not opinions, facts. And really, if you stand by the facts, it's hard for anybody to hurt you.
What do you do with something? We've got about 2 minutes. Speaking of aliens, because you just mentioned that, what do you do with a case like, say, Dyatlov Pass, right, over in Russia, a famous case, where there was, with everything that happened, and it's still not resolved to this day, with everything that happened, which was bad, where the town said, hey, there were lights in the sky. We saw things happen above their campsite as this was going down. What do you do when there's something like that mentioned in one of these tragic cases?
Luckily for me, it doesn't fit our profile points, and I haven't written about it.
That's a good political answer. Okay. Do you have a separate pile? Do you have a separpt pile? Okay. Strange.
Jimmy, we all have a lot of piles. Okay.
Yeah. Right. So you've got a lights in the sky pile?
No, I actually don't have one of those, but I do have some that have some strange characteristics with it, like a physicist that in Arizona, that case.
And that's pretty interesting case, and I hope that we can get to that tonight. I am going to say, I just brought up the Mount Rainier case, and the fascinating thing for me, as I started to read about it, we'll get into it in depth when we come back, but it was the dates. And all of us in ufology know those key dates, right? And I'm like, wait a minute here. Where is this going? And we'll talk about that when we come back. And I think there may be an alien ET connection in that Mount Rainier case. What say you, Mr. Paulides?
I didn't write it for my health.
I know. It's pretty crazy. Let's do it when we come back. Our guest tonight, David Paulides. Hey, David, where can everybody, how many books have you written so far in the 411 series?
8 books.
Where can everybody go and get them?
Do not go to Amazon. You'll pay $55 to $60 for them. We don't sell them there. Go to our website, Can-Am, like Canadian American, canammissing.com.
And we also put up right before the show, I'll retweet it during the break, so we'll read David's new trailer for the documentary that we'll be presenting to everybody next month. That is up there, too. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. More with David when we come back after this short break. Stay with us. You can follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. You can also follow David. He is tweeting tonight, by the way. You can follow him at Can-Am, and we've got the links right there at jimmychurchradio.com. We'll be right back after this short break. Stay with us. You're listening to a preview of Fade to Black. To get the full episode, go to jimmychurchradio.com and get our podcast. Click on the podcast banner or sign up in the membership area for downloadable MP3s. Everything commercial free. All right, welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. I was just listening to the commercials during the break here in the bunker. And, yeah, I was in the ER on Sunday. And I just want to say this. I want to thank Ronnie McMullen and Life Change Tea, because that's what got me back to earth right there. Life Change Tea, drinking colostrum, GI Joy, and everything else. I went on a massive dosage, and I feel great. Life Change Tea. Now, David, somebody... This is like the best question of the night right here. Is it 411 or 411? Let's solve this right now, because I've heard both from hosts over the years with David as a guest. I'm in the 411 camp, and that is a tweet from Cortana. So what is it?
I think it depends on your age, Jimmy. If you're old like us, then when your mom said, hey, get on the phone, call information, and give me the phone number for the local McDonald's, well, she'd say call 411.
That's right.
And if you're a newbie, maybe 411. In reality, it doesn't matter, whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah, you know what? I'm kind of both, because you're right. It's always been 911 or 411. Of course, right? Of course. And then 911. And then so you've got that, you know, in your frontal lobes. So yeah, that's okay. I'm going 411, and I've said both tonight. So let's give a credit to our generation. Let's go to this Mount Rainier case, and I'm going to let you. I'm going to set it up, and I'm going to let you run with it. But as I started to read about this case, first off, it's military. Second, it's in the air. But the third thing was the date, and it's 1946. And the second that I saw that, I was in. And it's pretty interesting. But for me, the beginning of the case is important, of course. But it's what we're going to be discussing at the end of the case, which I find that just absolutely fascinating. So what happened?
So first of all, Mount Rainier National Park is in the state of Washington. Last year they had 1.5 million visitors, and I doubt that there's a handful of people that visited that park that know what I'm going to tell you. But Mount Rainier is the highest mountain in the Cascade Range at 14,410 feet, and it's ranked in the top 16 of the most dangerous mountains in the world, with 26 glaciers on it. Now we're going to go back December 10th, 1946, 6 United States Marine Curtiss Commando R-5C transports were sitting on the tarmac at El Toro Marine Base in Southern California. And they were loaded with 200 soldiers to be flown to the Sandpoint Naval Air Station in Seattle. It was about a 6.5-hour flight, and these planes at the time could fly up to about 24,500 feet. And the cargo area was not pressurized, so they usually tried to stay a little bit lower.
So you could breathe. Yeah, no oxygen. Right.
Right. And the flight plan called them to fly at about 9,000 feet. Well, the six planes left in a staggered procession at about 10:36 in the morning. Now, how did I get this information? When I started to put these pieces together, and I filed the Freedom of Information Act request against the Navy and the Marines, and I got a whole crap load of information. So that's where I got most of this. But one of the R-5Cs was piloted by Major Robert Riley. And at 4:13 p.m., he contacted Toledo, Ohio Air Traffic Control, reporting that he was getting ice on his wings. And he asked for permission to go higher to get out of the wet and get out of the clouds. He estimated he was 30 miles south of his destination, which was the Naval Air Station. He was told to contact air traffic control once he reached his new altitude, and he would get approval to go up. Well, he never got a hold of air traffic control, everyone assumed he flew up higher and got out of the bad weather. Now, during this time, 5 of the R-5Cs had already landed in Seattle. Now, notes in the Freedom of Information Act file stated that the Everett, Washington Air Traffic Control should have been able to hear this plane, and they never did. And there was enough fuel for this thing to fly for 10 hours. They were about 6.5 hours into it. Well, Riley's R-5C never arrived at the Naval Air Station. On December 11th, the entire Pacific Northwest went into high alert as the search for this R-5C was going on. The issue for the search was the weather was horrific. Blizzard, snow, rain, depending on the altitude. It was just bad. Well, rangers at Mount Rainier reported hearing a plane pass their location at 4:15 p.m. on the day in question. They never heard a crash, no impact, nothing unusual. Now, for 5 days after the disappearance, the snow just pounded this region of Washington. And headlines at the time stated that the storms prevented a search for the plane by air. But you got to remember, 32 soldiers were on this plane. Now, this search went on for months. Now, a tattered fragment of a Marine's uniform, a weathered piece of a serviceman's health record, and some tiny bits of wreckage indicated to the service that a plane had hit a mountain. A lone hiker on Rainier had recovered some strange things on the snow, and that was located above 10,000 feet. Now, the reports at the time stated that the plane exploded and scattered these remains everywhere.
Now, I want to stop you there for a second because I find that interesting where the Rangers reported the sound of a plane at 4:15, but no crash, no explosion. Now we have an explosion, or at least that's what they are saying. But the Rangers didn't say that they heard an explosion.
That is 100% correct. Now, here's where it gets really confusing. So the Marines are flying the plane, there's Marines on the plane, and the Navy is making all these statements.
That's right.
Now, a lot of people don't know this, but the Marines are actually under the Department of the Navy. But still, it was really weird when I'm reading all this that there isn't a Marine general, colonel, nobody that wants to make any statements on the part of the Marines. It's all Navy. So the NPS said very little about this incident at the beginning. Now, on August 24th, 1947, Rangers stated that 10 bodies were located on the Tahoma Glacier. 21 bodies were located by 2 NPS Rangers later, and a rep from the Navy said this was true as he went up on the mountain with the Rangers. They said that they didn't know if they could remove the bodies, and they never gave an explanation.
Right. How can they say that? And this is, I need to address a couple of direct points. Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. Wow, that was a weird click. Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's move on. That was kind of trippy. Is this? We're not talking about Antarctica or Greenland. This is Mount Rainier outside of Seattle, inside of the United States. What is the difficulty in a proper search and rescue? One, the day of, the day after, not months later, and then the retrieval of how difficult can it be? It's not like we don't have resources. It's outside of Seattle. When you started to read this, the facts of the case, David, what went through your mind on that? It doesn't make any sense.
No, you're 100% right. It doesn't make sense to me when you have the resources of every armed forces group and their motto, never leave anyone behind.
Mm-hmm.
So the Navy and the National Park Service consult with the Army's Mountain Division, which are experts in high altitude, about the task of removing the bodies. Now, it was stated that it would take 2 weeks and 24 men to bring the bodies down, and that he said it was in a dangerous area. Now, I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking, who cares if it takes 200 men to bring those bodies down? If you're a family member, you want your body. You want your family's member to have a burial. You want closure. So an article on August 28, 1947 stated that the Navy has said that the 13th Naval District had an idea about how to remove the bodies and that it had been abandoned. The families had a memorial service on the mountain down near the park, and 2,000 acres of the glacier had been allocated as a memorial and no travel zone. Now, in June of 1982, a climber was on the mountain and found an odd piece of equipment on it and brought it down, and it was reviewed and determined to be part of that plane. To this date, not one body has ever been recovered. And there's been no determination of if the plane had engine problems, etc. Now, let's go back on this. The R5C disappeared near Rainier on 12/10 of 46, December 10th. Now, fast forward about 6.5, 7 months to June 29th, 1947. Very close in time and location, what I'm going to tell you. Headlines: flying tin pans hit 1,200 miles per hour. Flying tin pans hit 1,200 miles per hour. Pilot Ken Arnold made the sighting adjacent to Mount Rainier. He was a businessman. He owned his own airplane. He was actually flying by Mount Rainier looking for this crash, and he saw these strange objects fly by him. Now, what's really weird about all of this is this last summer, I happened to be in Ohio, and Bruce Maccabee, a physicist, an optical physicist, is a good friend, and our film crew was there doing some filming, and I sat down and I talked to Bruce about this exact case, and Bruce came out with a book about it, and it's a great book, and it's called 3 Minutes in June, the UFO sighting that changed the world. And Bruce is an expert at numbers, locations, speed, etc., and he took apart Arnold's observation and validated it 1,000%. Skeptics are trying to downplay his sighting, but Bruce proved it happened and that the speeds were probably very close to accurate when he saw these unidentified objects flying by Rainier at 1,200 miles per hour. Now, Arnold was in the air looking at an object in the sky, multiple objects. And this really started the modern world of UFO sightings. And in the book, I state, well, do you believe in coincidences? Because it's a mighty big coincidence in my mind that this entire group of soldiers is never found. Allegedly, this thing piles into a mountain, and 6 months later, the biggest UFO sighting in the world at that point happens right next to Rainier.
You mentioned something there that we need to go back and listen to again. 2,000-acre memorial at the crash site, which is now a no-travel zone. 2,000 acres, memorial, no-travel zone. That smells of cover-up to me, and I don't go down the conspiracy road immediately, but this is direct. This is a 2,000-acre memorial, no bodies recovered, and it's a no-travel zone, so nobody can even go up there and check it out now, right?
So that was written in 1947 by, I think, a commander in the Navy that had worked with the Park Service to get this established. And I looked at umpteen dozen maps of Rainier. I couldn't find any no-travel zone. I couldn't find any restricted area on Rainier. So if it exists, like I said, Jimmy, I doubt anybody going to Rainier knows that they're looking at a mountain that entombs dozens of military men.
What do you think the connection is ultimately? I mean, the timing and Mount Rainier and Kenneth Arnold and, of course, this incident here. What do you think? Is there a connection? It certainly suggests one. What do you think it is?
Well, I mean, logically, I'm a man of facts. Facts are that it's a very strange coincidence, coupled with the fact they didn't recover one body off of Rainier. And when you look at the photo, which I have, and I thank John Greenwald of the Black Vault for getting this document, there's a photo of this R5C that looks pretty mangled, but it definitely is not destroyed totally. And it shows searchers around it. And my comment to John was, this doesn't look like everyone was annihilated or exploded in that mountain. So I have no idea what's going on, but it doesn't make any sense to me.
When we have one of the most popular mottos and sayings in the military, which is "No man left behind," right? We understand that and we respect that. How is it possible to allow that to happen inside of the United States?
See, I wonder, I don't think it could happen today just because communications is so quick and so thorough, and maybe in 1947 it didn't reach the worldwide notoriety that it would reach today. And, I'm sure you could get a bunch of special services people that would hike those bodies out right now today if they knew. So it doesn't make any sense.
Well, and why not recover them today? I mean, that's the other thing. It seems like it would, with helicopters and the technology that we have, and night vision and FLIR, and imaging of the ground, that would be able to locate the exact crash site and go and give these guys the memorial that they deserve for their family.
Well, when I wrote about this, I was surprised that no show out there that's one of these search and rescue or, fringe shows has ever talked about this incident.
No, I don't get it. I don't get it. I was fascinated with this. I was just fascinated with the case. And it's the timing of it being 1946. That is one issue. And the delay of the search and rescue and no bodies recovered. Okay, it's strange from the word go. But to have a no travel zone spread over 2,000 acres, that just doesn't sit well with me. And you're absolutely right. This is something that I didn't know about this case. I mean, everybody should know about this case.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, let's okay. This wasn't on your list. But since we're talking about the military, I want to talk about the blimp in San Francisco.
Oh, yeah.
That it might be stranger than this case that we just discussed. And I hope I'm not catching you too much off guard here. But here we have, again, 2 missing servicemen that disappeared out of a blimp in San Francisco. Can you set that up and let everybody know what happened here?
So ironically, the blimps that protected the California coast normally went out of Treasure Island, which is right off of San Francisco. I grew up in the Bay Area. I grew up in a little town called Cupertino, and it's very close to a place called Moffett Field Naval Air Station. And because of certain circumstances, this day in question, this blimp went out of Moffett Field. And there were supposed to be 3 people on the flight. One guy at the last minute didn't make it, but 2 people went. And the blimp takes off and it patrols up and down the coast, very slow, very methodical. Well, on this day, they're up off of San Francisco near Daly City, off the coast. And people that were fishing and boaters on the water said that they watched this thing abruptly turn up and go into the clouds, like a very steep angle. And just before he did that, the pilot told their air traffic control that they were investigating a large oil slick off the coast. And they were responding some Coast Guard cutters out to look at it as well. That's the last they heard of him. Then this thing goes up into the clouds. They try to raise him. They can't raise him on the radio. And then all of a sudden, the Navy gets a call that their blimp has crashed on a street in Daly City. And this is really weird because the blimps also carried explosives that they could drop if they saw like a German submarine, let's say, or something like that. And so they were concerned. And they get there, and the blimp is in one piece. The door's open. People watched it hit, got right there, and saw the door open before it crashed, and nobody was inside. And it is one of the greatest mysteries of our Air Force and naval history because they could never, ever understand, number one, what caused that blimp to take an abrupt turn and go up into the clouds. There's no reason the door ever should have been open. And for them to have this kind of slow, controlled crash, because blimps don't really, plow into a building and destroy everything. It's very slow and methodical. They said these guys were lifetime pilots, knew the blimp like the inside of your house. No engine problems were with the blimp. There was no aeronautical issue. And all of a sudden, these guys were just gone. And so they searched for him off the coast for 3 weeks, never found either man. No man has ever surfaced.
Now, there was the report initially that they actually landed at another base and were safe and sound.
Yeah, there were multiple blimps flying simultaneously. They all took off at once, and they all came back, and then the new ones went out. And another one of the 4 that flew that coast landed at another location. That was an understandable mistake, but still, I didn't quite understand how they can get that mixed up. Radio transmissions, you kind of know who's who.
Yeah, and when you read through the facts of the case, as I did in the book, I am picturing law enforcement and civilians, approaching the blimp and going up, thinking that they're going to rescue somebody. Right, that there's somebody on board, and they go up, and there's nobody flying this thing. Now we've got a genuine mystery on our hands. Where are the bodies? Bodies just don't, well, technically, disappear.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, Now that's pretty fascinating, but they've never been found to this day.
Nope.
What do you think? Okay, if we're thinking logically here, this is what I was doing earlier, is that, do you think that they just jumped? Do you think that they wanted to disappear? And, you know what I mean with that this was intentional? Did they get in a fight? Did they just jump out and fall into the ocean and were eaten by sharks? Or is there something else going on? I don't know.
When I was in high school, I took scuba diving lessons, got certified when I was 14.
Right.
And we used to be at the junior college at De Anza's swimming pool, and they had this high dive. And some of the guys said, "Hey, Dave, we'll give you $20 if you could jump off that high dive." I thought about it. I went up there, and it's really high, Jimmy.
Right.
You got to be half nuts just to jump off something like that. To think that somebody's going to jump out of a blimp over the ocean, they got to be absolutely crazy. Because the Pacific Ocean, that temperature runs between 48 and 54 degrees up off of San Francisco. You're going to freeze to death.
That's right. And they knew that.
Oh, yeah.
So again, with every other case like this that you write about, we have to scratch some things off the list here. And one of them is these guys just jumping out for a good time or trying to run or trying to hide. You're not going to do that. You're not going to jump out over the Pacific Ocean. You're going to die. So we can take that off of the list, but their bodies weren't found on land. I don't know. This is a mystery. That's an amazing, truly missing 411 case. David.
Yes.
Yes, I think you would agree.
Oh,
yes.
That's why I wrote about it, Jimmy.
When we come back, I'll prep you for this. Again, I read through the entire book, and there were a couple of cases in here that I wanted to talk about. And one of them is the Blythe Yuma case. And the reason for that, and we'll do it when we come back, is that everything that is represented in this particular case, I'm familiar with. I lived in Pasadena for years. We have that aspect. Both of these people were from Pasadena. We all know about Blythe and Yuma, Arizona, where this actually resolved. We're going to do that when we come back. But I don't know if you know this, David, as you were writing and investigating this part of the book, did you know that there are Nazca-type lines out there in the desert between Blythe and Yuma?
I heard about that one time, but I never got to confirm it.
Yes. Oh, they are there. Now, they're indigenous right? I know that, somebody here in North America made them. We don't know how old they are or what they represent, but they're ginormous, and we have our own Nazca lines right here in North America. And I'm reading about this case and where that plane ended up, and it's right there. We'll discuss all of that. I know the audience just leaned forward going, what did Jimmy just say? We'll talk about all of that when we come back. Our guest tonight, David Paulides. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. You can follow David on Twitter at CanAmMissing. We'll be right back. Stay with us. You have just listened to a full hour free preview of Fade to Black. To get the full show, all archives, just go to our podcast section at jimmychurchradio.com. You can also sign up to be a Fadernaut in our membership area, where we have downloadable MP3s. Go to jimmychurchradio.com. Go Beckley Teppy.